You're watching BCTV, Brantford's community access station.
This is BCTV, Brantford Government Television, a service of Brantford Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of Brantford.
Good evening, everyone. Just want to get going. We're past 7 o'clock. I gotta wait a couple seconds for Vinny to finish up here. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah,
now we can.
There you go.
Well, welcome to the public meeting for the Plan of Conservation Development update. Just for those of you who are new to the process, I'll just mention quickly that the Plan of Conservation Development is a state-required planning document. The town is required to do one every 10 years. Our last one was done in 2008, so lo and behold, 2018, here we are doing it again. It's an advisory document. It's not regulatory in nature. We're going to have a presentation very shortly. It's going to explain that in a little more detail. However, it has been a collaborative development here. So this represents months of work by the town's planning consultant, Glenn Shoulder, who's going to be talking to you briefly in a few minutes. Most importantly, the steering committee is appointed by the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm sorry, how's that? Is that any better? Okay, I'll try and keep it close. We have several members, almost all, I think, of the steering committee is here tonight. They're seated mostly in the front row here. I'll start with Barbara Riccozzi, who's recently retired as a DOT engineer and has been, everybody's participated, so I'll just say that. Vinny Hincherick, who's a local surveyor, brings that perspective to the steering committee. Next to him is Bill Horn, a longtime member of the Brantford Land Trust and involved local citizen. Peter Basserman, to his right, and he is a member of the Inland Wetlands Commission, longtime resident of the community. And Phil Carlone has been serving as the chair of the steering committee, a local realtor, and I believe you grew up here, so I'll give you that credit. And then next to him is Marcy Paluzzi, member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, landscape architect, as well as local realtor. Moving across the aisle, we have Kathy Bazan, who's a member of the Economic Development Commission, and also works for Eversource. And a couple of seats beyond her is John Luss, who's a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, a local environmental consultant. And rounding out the group is Joe Chadwick near the windows there, who is an architect, has been a member of the Brantford Housing Authority and the Historical Society, and is my neighbor, as a matter of fact. Also, we have with us the first selectman, Jamie Cosgrove, in the back. Let's see what else can I tell you. We also have the chairman of our Planning and Zoning Commission, Chuck Andres, seated in the audience. So I think we have an interesting group here tonight. Several faces look familiar to me. Brad here. So I think with that, I will turn it over to our consultant, Glenn Shoulder, to run through a brief presentation. After that, we'll have basically a town hall meeting style question session or opportunity to present comments you may have about the plan.
Great. With that type of mic, you have to speak down to it.
Okay.
So hold it out.
Yeah, no, I'm tall, so it's easy for me to talk down to it. That's why I'll try that over there. Greetings, my name is Glenn Shoulder with Planometrics. We're the planning consulting firm that had an opportunity to work with Brantford on the 2008 plan and also this update. So as part of that, we've had a chance to see Brantford and how it's changed over the last 10 or 15 years. And we are excited about having had the opportunity to share our expertise in working with the committee to look towards the future of the community. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming here tonight. If that was the last slide, it would be the shortest meeting in Brantford history, but it's not. I just wanted to make sure I thanked everybody before we got started. The program tonight is pretty straightforward. I'm going to give you an overview of what is a plan of conservation and development and what's in Brantford's plan of conservation and development. We're going to open it up for discussion. I have a scripting pad, so all of your comments will be transcribed, if you will, and we're going to talk about those at the next steering committee meeting. And our only real rule here tonight is there's a hard adjourn at 9 o'clock. So if we get to 9 o'clock and we're still going, we're going to shoot for a hard adjourn. So let me start off and talk about what is a plan of conservation and development. As Harry pointed out, it is an advisory document which is meant to lay out a vision for the future of a community, the types of things that the community can and should be working on. And it's really designed to answer the question, what type of community do we want to be when we grow up? What can we be doing or should we be doing in the future in a lot of different areas? The reasons for preparing a plan of conservation and development are multifold. But the first issue often is to figure out where we are as a community. What is going on? We take so many things for granted, but let's understand where we are as a community. I love this little cartoon from Calvin and Hobbes. And so many people don't really sort of think about planning, and they discover where they're heading when they arrive there. And that's really the antithesis of planning. What we want to try to do is evaluate where we are going and then envision where it is we actually want to be going in the future and the issues that we should be concerned about and focusing on, and then putting a plan together about how we can get there. So those are the sort of the basic elements of the planning process that we went through. So what I'd like to do now is kind of give you an overview of the Ppo Cd. I know there's at least one member of the audience who read the whole thing. I know there's at least one member of the audience who admitted that only half was read. So this will give you a gamut of the whole plan. The Plan of Conservation and Development has 5 key parts to it. The first part is an introduction or an overview of where we are as a community, really kind of setting the stage for some of the issues that we face. And Brantford is changing. What's up here are these charts are called population pyramids. And they're broken into, each row is a 5-year group, and the width of the bar tells you how many people are in each of these age groups. On the left-hand side, we have 1970. And the baby boomers, who here was born between 1945 and 1965? You're baby boomers, and you're in that orange group, or you were anyway if you lived in Brantford. And the median age in Brantford at that time was 30. So half the people were younger than 30 and half the people were older than 30. Fast forward 40 years to 2010, the community has grown. We're 28,000 residents now, but the median age has also grown to 46.9. And so the black line on the right-hand side mimics the population composition in 1970 and shows us how we've changed as a community since that time. And as you can see, to the far, I think there's a laser pointer on here. There we go. Out here shows there's many more people in these age groups than there were in 1970 and fewer in the younger age groups. That starts to explain our changing age composition and how the needs of our community are also changing over time. And you can see that the baby boomers are getting older. We're now in this, or we were in 2010, in those age groups, and we will continue to age over time. And why that's important is because Brantford has gone through significant eras in its history. If we think about our history, we had the agricultural era from its first founding to about the mid-1800s, when we were mostly an agricultural community. The Industrial Revolution came along, and Brantford started to get industry and other activities because of the port and the harbor, and also became a resort served by a trolley system. And between 1850 and about 1940, you can see that there was sort of gentle population growth. Post-World War II, we've heard about the suburban expansion that occurred after that time. And as you can see, Brantford grew significantly in that time, the suburban era. But we're now entering an era that we might, in fact, call maturing as a community. Much of our land is built upon. The housing units that are on the ground are going to be occupied by people. As households get older, as people get older, the households get smaller. And so what we may be actually facing in Brantford is a situation where population may level off or decrease slightly in the future because fewer people will be living in the existing housing units we have. Who in the room's household has gotten larger over the last 10 years? Whose has gotten smaller? And that's the thing that's happening. It's not that people don't love Brantford anymore. They love it to death, right? They live here and they like living here. It's just a situation where households are going to be getting smaller. So these are some of the issues we need to think about in our community as we move forward. We have a diverse housing stock, but 70% of the housing units in town are occupied by 1 or 2 people. And that's a far cry, if you will, from 1970 and what the characteristics were at that time. We're an employment center. We have a very strong economy here, employment base, et cetera. We're very fortunate in that regard. About 86% of the land in town is developed, but we are a coastal community, and issues related to sea level rise and coastal storms are issues that are really showing up on our radar screen of things we need to think about and consider. For those of you who attended the public meeting last fall at Walsh School or participated in an online survey, what we learned is that residents are really proud of open space downtown, the community facilities we have, the things that make Brantford special to them. And they're sorry about Route 1 development, congestion and speeding and other things like that happen in the community. And some of the key issues that residents identified as they wanted this plan to think about were issues related to coastal areas, business and economic development, open space, natural resources, walking, biking, character, and downtown as well. And these topics are in the plan. We'll talk about those in a little bit. So the key issues generally fall into sort of 3 themes in the plan. These are the 3 of the 5 things I mentioned in the plan. These are the central 3. And they're organized around what we might want, sorry about that, what we might want to protect in Brantford, how we might want to guide growth in the future, and what services or facilities to provide. So the conservation element of the plan, again, it's a plan of conservation and development, focuses on coastal issues, natural resources, open space, and community character. The first chapter in there is the chapter related to coastal issues. From the work of the steering committee and the discussions we had, we felt that this was the area that was the top attention, if you will.
2 things. Could you talk a little slower?
Yes?
It's hard to read what's up there.
Okay.
So we need, I think, a little more time to try to take in what we're looking at.
Okay. Yep, fine. Thank you. I get kind of excited, so I do start going quickly, so thank you very much for slowing me down. So coastal issues were identified as a key issue for the community to address. The main reason is that UConn is estimating or recommending that communities should plan for possibly 20 inches of sea level rise by the year 2050. That's not that far away. And 20 inches is about knee height for me and is perhaps knee height for you. And so the question is, a coastal community with the wonderful bays, inlets, islands, and things that we have, what does 20 inches mean for us? And so the plan recommends that we establish a framework for how we're going to start to address these issues. What roads are at risk? What sewer pump stations? How can we look at these issues and prepare for them? And how can we start soon? Because if we wait for 2050 and say, oh, look, we got to 20 inches, but we haven't done anything before that, we're going to be behind the ball. So what can we do to anticipate and address this issue? And of course, because of the beauty of the coastal area, the plan recommends we protect coastal resources and maintain and enhance coastal access in 3 different ways. Visual access, so people can see the shoreline. Physical access, so they can actually get to the beach. And then boating access, so if you want to go out on a boat, you can go out on a boat and try to promote those issues. The plan has a chapter on protecting natural resources. Maintaining and improving water quality is the #1 recommendation in this section. Even though much of Brantford is served by public water, we still rely on the environment for overall environmental health, and water is integral to life. So the plan recommends we maintain and improve water quality. We look at water quantity and flooding issues. What's been happening recently, and you may recall from the nor'easters of just this spring, we're getting more frequent, more severe storms. And our drainage systems weren't really designed for this. They were designed for what we thought our storm pattern would be. So how can we accommodate these types of things with the drainage system we have in place? So protecting natural resources is an important element of the plan as well. The plan recommends preserving open space. This scored very well at the public meeting in the fall at Walsh School. The town and the Land Trust and other partner organizations have done a wonderful job preserving open space in Brantford. Those efforts are to be commended. The plan recommends that we reaffirm our open space vision and document all of the land that we have and properties we have to make sure that we understand and will manage them in the best way possible for the unique circumstances of each parcel. And continue the effort, if you will, in preserving open space in the community because it enhances our quality of life. The plan excuse me, has a chapter about enhancing community character. It talks about maintaining and enhancing design review. We have a design review process in the town center today, and perhaps we could extrapolate that to areas outside of the town center in terms of promoting better design of buildings and sites. Continue to protect historic resources in town, preserve and enhance scenic features, and the plan suggests that we might look at ways to establish an identity or wayfinding program for all of you, because you live in town, you know your way around, you know how to get to places. But there are people who come to town who have no clue, and they don't even know that they're close to Short Beach or Stony Creek or Indian Neck or some of the other places in our community. So we're not talking about a commercial type of program, but some way to recognize some of the unique resources and things that we have that we could share with people and improve our brand. The third major section of the plan is the development section of the plan. And whether we continue to grow as a community or change just happens to us, this section of the plan starts to lay out strategies for how that can happen. And some of the components of this, first of all, is to strengthen our overall structure. One of the things that makes Brantford unique and different from a number of the other communities is we have these villages, and they each have their own sort of unique identity. So rather than see them sort of assimilate into each other over time, the goal of the plan recommends that we celebrate each of these different villages and let them maintain and enhance and grow their character. So to promote and enhance pedestrian-friendly, mixed-use village-type areas, we recognize that we have downtown Brantford here, Short Beach, Stony Creek, and here we have Pine Orchard, Indian Neck that have elements that could grow over time to promote this concept or stay the way that they are. But we'd like to preserve that and enhance that concept again of village-type areas. The plan also suggests that we take a look at the use of the special development district, the planned development district approach, and ask ourselves if it's doing the things we want it to do. Should we have guidance or guidelines in place for that and possibly limit the use of the special development approaches in the future, or at least affirm if it's doing what we want it to do. There's a chapter on enhancing Brantford Center. It's an area that we've spent significant time and resources over the years in terms of enhancing the town green, the events that happen there. It's the heart and soul of the community, the focal point in so many different ways. So the plan recommends we retain and enhance the sense of place, try to find ways to keep it vibrant, enhance access and mobility and parking. People say, well, I don't know where to park when I go to the center. And we looked and we found there's plenty of parking spaces if you know where to look. But we shouldn't be keeping the parking a secret from people. We should tell them where it is so that they feel comfortable coming here. And this would, again, enhance its attractiveness and the types of things that happen. The town recently completed a study to promote transit-oriented development in the area really between the Green and Town Hall and the harbor. And the plan recommends we promote transit-oriented development in that area and also continue to manage activities in the town center area appropriately. Economic development, we're very, very fortunate to have significant industrial and business areas in the community that provide us with a strong tax base and fund many of the services that we enjoy so much about Brantford. The plan recommends we continue to promote economic development to support the businesses that are here, look to attract more. The plan talks about enhancing some of the economic opportunity areas that we have. We think that the town center and the villages are great opportunities to focus development. The I-95 interchanges, 53, 54, 55, 56, these are places where business development is today, and we could encourage appropriate development there in the future. Other opportunity areas are the Route 1 corridor and the industrial area. How can we make the most efficient and effective use of the land areas we have to maintain a strong tax base in Brantford? Residential development, many different residential areas in the community. We want to preserve and protect the quality of life in those residential areas. There's growing recognition around the state about some of the challenges we have in terms of addressing our housing needs today, which are different than they were back, for example, in 1970. So older baby boomers are sometimes looking to downsize or to find an alternative housing situation which is lower maintenance requirements than what they had. So that's a potential housing need or change. And also there's interest around the state and recognition for providing for housing that is affordable for people who are trying to get into the housing system, if you will, the challenges that they have. The plan talks about the fact that Brantford has a lot of what we call naturally occurring affordable housing. There's housing that's affordable for many people, but the state in their accounting system for who has affordable housing and who does not doesn't count that because it's not deed restricted. So it's an interesting challenge, if you will, for us to address this issue. And the plan talks about different ways that we can address the affordable housing issue going forward. The plan has a chapter on promoting sustainability and resilience. Sustainability deals with things from how we can start to address greenhouse gas emissions and our reliance on things that have created climate change and other things like that. What can we do to begin to address this issue? Again, we don't want to wait to 2050 and the water's 20 inches high to start thinking about these issues. And it also talks about goals for energy sustainability, water conservation, waste generation, et cetera, ways for us to be a greener community moving forward. And resilience is that in simple events, one-day snowstorms, all the way up to sea level rise or flooding or other issues like that, how can we ensure that we're a resilient community? So as adversity happens or might happen over time, how can we prepare for it and bounce back quickly? How can we be better prepared, perhaps, than our neighbors? Section 4 of the plan deals with infrastructure or services and facilities in the community. And included within this is community facilities overall. The plan looks back and relies on the 2012 community facility inventory that was done in terms of the types of facilities. It recommends that we look at addressing near-term issues in terms of adopting a facilities management approach. How can we most cost-effectively manage the facilities that we have? We have some facilities which are underutilized, some which are overstressed. How can we reconcile all of this in the most effective way? Excuse me? And what should we do, for example, about the Public Works facility, which we're currently leasing? There's some medium-term issues in terms of facility maintenance, providing for meeting space. Here we are at the library, before we were at the fire station, the senior center, other situations like that. Plan for recreation facilities long-term. And again, make sure that in terms of our changing age composition and issues related to sustainability and climate change, our community facilities are set up to be shelters or other things like that that we might need in the future. There's a section in the plan about vehicular transportation. You may recall when we were talking about SARIs, people always wish that the car in front of them on the road wasn't there because then they could just be 10 or 20 feet closer to their destination. But we all need to get around. And the question is, how is our transportation system, our vehicular transportation system functioning? The number one recommendation in this section is to improve exit 53, because exit 53 is a partial interchange. If you are in the western part of town and you are headed easterly, you can't get on at 53, which is right here. You have to continue along Route 1 to get to 54 if you want to head east. What that does is create significant congestion all along the way and at these intersections. So the plan suggests that we can look at this area. It's an opportunity area for economic development, but also simplify some of the traffic volumes which create congestion that frustrate all of us. That we continue to address safety and capacity issues on major roadways, look at issues related to sea level rise, and then also to look at issues on town roadways as well. There was quite a lot of interest as part of our work on promoting pedestrian and bicycle transportation in the community. The plan oops, wrong button. The plan recommends we look at ways to expand pedestrian and bicycle facilities in the community, to interconnect different parts of town. This map in the plan identifies a preliminary look at sidewalk priority areas. The priority 1 areas could be the town center area, so that whenever you get downtown, you can easily walk to your destination and you don't find situations where there aren't sidewalks. And then how can we extend out to the villages and the other areas to create a meaningful system to take advantage of the pathway system and the trails that we have in town? The plan recommends that we consider adopting what's called a complete streets approach. Historically, roadways and streets were considered to be the domain of the automobile. And if a pedestrian was walking along the street, you would honk and say, "Get out of my way." And there's a growing realization nowadays that the roads are for everybody. They're for bicyclists, walkers, and others. So how can we make a more complete street that has some of these facilities? And there's some streets in Brantford that are narrow enough. It's going to be really a challenge to provide adequate space for everybody. But there are some other places where we could do things, and this would enhance our quality of life in the future if we can make progress in this area. The plan also recommends enhancing transit services, Shoreline East, local buses, et cetera. In terms of utility infrastructure, we looked at 3 different elements, what we call piped infrastructure, which is water, sewer, natural gas, and storm drainage. Many parts of Brantford are served by public water and public sewer. The storm drainage system, we're looking at trying to figure out ways to be greener in terms of how we treat stormwater to make that system more efficient. In terms of public sewer, the state requires we identify areas in town which are sewer avoidance areas. And one of the issues we've talked about in the plan is what to do about Stony Creek, because we don't want sewers to induce growth that we don't want, but if septic systems and other things are challenged over time, sewers might need to be a necessary response. So how do we address that in the plan? And there's some language that talks about that. Wired infrastructure, both in terms of electricity, telephone and cable, and then also wireless infrastructure, because who in the room has a cell phone, right? And we rely on important service on our cell phone, so it's the new infrastructure of the future. Excuse me. Part 5 of the plan is the conclusion. As part of our work, we've tried to balance all of the different elements from the sections of the plan about what to protect, how to guide growth, and what to provide, to find the sweet spot in the middle, which is decidedly and uniquely Brantford. What should our plan recommend? So the future land use plan for the community summarizes these recommendations. It recognizes the open spaces where we have them and have preserved them, the business and industrial areas, the residential neighborhoods, and the coastal areas and resources. There are no major changes to the overall land use pattern or fabric for Brantford in the future. It's really trying to do a better job at the community that we have today. There's a section in the plan on implementation. Of course, it recommends we implement the Ppo Cd. After the last plan, a strategic review committee was established, and the plan recommends we reinvigorate that with this, and the strategic review committee was established to implement the 2008 plan. So we're recommending that that be reinvigorated to implement this plan, to use the Ppo Cd as a guide for planning and zoning actions, and also, to the extent possible, use it as a guide for the operating and capital budgets, so we fund the things that are in fact important to us. As part of our work, the steering committee did a survey, and the question was for each member on the committee, what is the most important issue to you? What is number 2? What is number 3? And we created groupings, if you will, of what those issues were. And at the very top of the list, far and away, well above any of the other elements of the plan, was to establish a framework for addressing coastal vulnerability. If we only do one thing as part of this plan, and we certainly hope that we do much more, we think that that's the issue that Brantford really needs to focus on moving forward, because it's going to catch up with us if we don't. And then some of the other issues in terms of priorities are also identified in the plan. And they include things like water quality, sustainability, economic development, Brantford Center, bicycle and pedestrian facilities, et cetera. And those are identified in the plan in terms of which ones were considered to be higher priorities than others. So why prepare a Ppo Cd? First of all, to identify where we are, figure out where we're heading as a community, what direction are we going in, and then to try to figure out whether or not our vision of where we want to be is different than where we're headed already, and then identify strategies to stop doing things that take us in directions we don't want to go in and start doing things that take us where it is that we want to go. And we think this plan is a document which will help us do that. So we've reached the point in the meeting where you can stop listening to me, and we would love to hear from you. So I think...
A general question or a series of questions.
You're going to be our first speaker, but because we're on BCTV...
You mean I have to identify myself?
Well, I'm not going to ask you to, but I certainly would like everybody able to be here, you both in the room and elsewhere.
My name is I've been a resident of Brantford for 50 years. When I first moved here, I had hair. So I've been here a long time. My question is as follows. To what state agency is this report submitted? If it's state mandated.
Is that going to work?
Yeah. I guess it's happening. Yeah, maybe just put this front and center.
Yeah. This is for TV, Branford, BCTV. Every community in the state is allowed to adopt zoning, and one of the corollary conditions along with that is to adopt a master plan or a plan of conservation and development which identifies your vision for the future so that land use activities can be considered in conformance with that.
I don't mean to be impolite, but you're not answering the question.
I'm trying to get there. If you give me, I wasn't done yet. So the state requires that a municipality prepare the plan, but there's no state agency that approves that plan or that it is submitted to. We are required, as part of the plan, to identify consistency with the state plan, but again, there's nobody who polices that. So the plan is for us. It's not to meet or gain approval from any state agency.
But we do need to file it.
We have to give it to the state when we're done, but again. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you?
I have got one other question.
I thought he had another one, yeah.
On this. What kind of evaluation has been made of the plan that was submitted in 2008? In other words, it's fine to develop planning, but the question is, what do you do with it? How do you evaluate it?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a great question. Hang on a second. So again, we're here today for statements, but we're happy to answer questions as they arise. So the Planning and Zoning Commission staff evaluated the plan on a 5-year interval after it was first adopted, compiled a report for the commission. I don't remember what the exact percentage was of the implementation, but there was quite a number of recommendations in the 2008 plan that were implemented. As part of our work, we've created booklets related to background information on each of these topics. They are on the town website under Planning and Zoning, and in the sidebar of each of those booklets is a recitation of the report in terms of the progress that was made on implementation. So I think it was heartening to me to see how much implementation had happened, and I think we hope that the same thing happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay Pottinger. And I apologize, I have to go to the RTM meeting in a few minutes. But you said you were welcoming comments, so I just want to underscore the point you made that Brantford has a strong employment base. We all know that it has great schools and there are superb recreational opportunities. So I'm disappointed that this draft plan doesn't put more emphasis on opening our town to other people who want to share and take advantage of what we have. And by that, I specifically mean by welcoming affordable housing, especially to people of lower income, into our town to take advantage of the employment, to attend our schools, and to enjoy our recreational opportunities. We have a political and a legal duty in Brantford under state law to take into account housing diversity and housing choice, especially for people of low and moderate income. and we are woefully inadequate with respect to deed-restricted housing, as you mentioned or referred to. But we also have a moral duty. It's not just political and legal. It's a duty to take our fair share of the people who would like to live here and would like to have the opportunities that those of us here in Brantford already enjoy. And so I would urge that the final plan make access to truly affordable housing a higher priority. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, yep. Sorry.
Glenn, just to follow up on your answer, the question was, what, if any, state agency do we have to report to? And I correctly answered none. But there is a bit of a hammer that if we don't do it, the state can withhold funding from certain projects.
Yeah. Yeah, let me just touch on that. So as Mr. Andrews mentioned, there is a timeliness requirement. So the state indicates that if your plan is older than 10 years, that you then become ineligible for state discretionary grants until it's been updated. So it's not a, I'm not sure you could, well, maybe you could do one word, right? You just have to meet the timeliness requirements and the reporting requirements. But it's a issue, if you will, in terms of how the state discretionary funds, et cetera. Yes. I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Louise LaMontagne. Many of you know me. My orientation for years in this town has been in the direction of open space. And I think that the WIS open town meeting reflected that that was a, what was the buzzword you used, like or favorite or? Proud.
Prouds and sorrows.
Proud, yes, right. Sorry was the other.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So I found those very powerful and very interesting. And I was disappointed in the final result of the plan in that the current hat, by the way, I'm wearing, just to full disclosure, is Nancy Mancini and I are co-chair of the Community Forest Commission, which supports tree planting, which has a lot of implication for both coastal management, erosion control, climate change, and a whole bunch of other things besides the aesthetic. So I was disappointed that better?
Yes.
That there were scratch outs that I would have hoped were not scratched out, that emphasize tree planting, more open space, proper management and preservation of what we have. And I think that that's something that I would like you to reconsider in your final draft.
And the only response I'd like to make, so there was an early briefing booklets prepared on the different topics. These are the ones that, again, are on the town website that had some suggested changes, if you will, to the recommendations in the 2008 Ppo Cd. And based on the comments that came up at that meeting, many of those are back in. So take a look at the plan. I think you'll find them in there.
Okay,
or I hope you will.
I hope so. The more the better.
Yep.
And public trees are extremely important in the attractiveness, desirability, and health of our town, and all of its species, including its non-human ones.
Thank you very much. Other thoughts or comments? Please do. Yes.
I'm Lauren Brown. I sent comments by email, but I have a question. Chapter 10-2E, page 86, it's under economic development. It's in one of the charts. It says, reconsider uses permitted in industrial zoning districts in light of changing market demand. And that wasn't clear to me what that means. Can someone explain it?
Yeah, I think in the industrial districts, thank you. You do. It's just, I lost you there for a second. So the industrial districts and much of the industrial zoning was configured at a time that the market, if you will, was different than it is today. So it tends to favor manufacturing and industry, more of the heavy industry. Our evolution, we've made great progress in bioscience, advanced manufacturing, and all of the other things. We want to make sure that the types of uses that are going on in the marketplace today are in fact enabled and permitted in our zoning regulations. So 10 years ago, we did a targeted industry study, which identified how the market was changing. And as part of this Ppo Cd, we want to make sure those uses, again, reflect, we're not cutting ourselves out of the portions of the market that may be growing or adapting or advancing. And we want to continue to be on the leading edge of this.
I'm Janet Reisman. I live in an old colonial house way out on East Main Street, in the IG2 area. But I'd like to make my comments sort of address the things as I see them right now, especially with regard to the Planning and Zoning Commission. When it comes to individual projects being proposed in Brantford, private interests and development interests win out every time over the public good. As a result, Brantford is a hodgepodge creation by many individuals, each asserting their right to do as they wish on their own property. There is no mechanism to overrule private interests in favor of the public good and to put the harmonious vision expressed by the Ppo Cd into action. Essentially, the Ppo Cd becomes toothless without enforcement capability, and the creation and refining of the Ppo Cd becomes a meaningless waste of time for some very good people. And coming here tonight, I see now it's supposedly right up front, considered as advisory, and I think that really makes it irrelevant, the whole exercise irrelevant. If no one can use it for anything in particular, for changing anything, then it's meaningless. The recent consideration by the Planning and Zoning Commission of a proposed development at 250 North Main Street demonstrated just how ineffective the Ppo Cd is. Next door to Clancy's funeral home, there's a proposal to build 2 retail buildings, one of which is 62,426 square feet, larger than Big Y and Stop and Shop. The developer is proposing blasting a rock wall and lowering it to approximately 26 feet to create sufficient parking. There will be a new traffic light and a turning zone to enter the plaza, and many of the trees and much of the rocky outcropping in front of the development will be destroyed. Many on the commission have expressed dismay about the size of the development, the blasting, the large parking areas, and the fate of the rock wall in the back and the rocky knoll in front. Yet the overriding sentiment is that they, as commissioners, are powerless to deny this special exception application. Property owners have rights to develop their own property as they see fit. As several commissioners and pro-development advocates observed last Thursday night, the applicant has paid a fortune in real estate taxes on the empty land while going through the development process with Town Hall. The applicants have redrawn and redrawn their plans for hearing after hearing, but they have only proffered piecemeal alterations. This effort and expense they have endured is not worthy of sympathy, but instead demonstrates the gross mismanagement and investment on their part. The town should never feel obligated to placate any entity due to such a miscalculation. Most important, they outright balk at the calls to reduce the size of the largest building. This appears to be the most prolific method of subterfuge that Brantford may ever endure by failing to disclose the purpose of a distinctive footprint which the applicants refuse to retract. An irreversible precedent is set by which future applicants can subvert any or all intentions of the Ppo Cd or the PCC. Some members of the public, as well as Town Planner Harry Smith, have warned that the proposed retail complex is in no way in keeping with the spirit of the Ppo Cd. It is overly destructive of on-site trees and shows no regard for the streetscape. But those considerations were drowned out by concern for being unfair to hardworking developers. The PCC knows that if they are too prejudicial against private rights to develop one's own property, then they run the risk of being sued. If it were worth its salt, the POCD would find a mechanism to authorize the Commission to deny an application just based on the fact that it contradicts the criteria expressed in the POCD. Yet the POCD provides no guidelines to the PCC and no protocol for judging and criticizing a project's compliance with the POCD. This is why I say the POCD is pie in the sky and has no teeth. It is worthless. It's a worthless, dreamy document that cannot be used in the real world to, to shape the town and its image. If Brantford fails to implement it's a legislative program that creates a distinct method of review between developers on the one hand and the PCC and the POCD on the other, it will have failed the citizens who wish their voice to be heard. I would like to suggest that applications for large projects, PDDs, and special exceptions be required to include a statement as part of their zoning application as to how their plan will uphold the POCD and why it is an overall benefit to the community. I would also urge that the PCC should be directed more clearly to vote up or down on a project based on their opinion of its stated compliance with the POCD goals. In this way, perhaps, Brantford might be able to energize the POCD by giving the PCC more powers to act on its behalf. To be most effective, I recommend that an ongoing presence of the POCD institutionally have as much say on an application as the town engineer, the town planner, the fire marshal, the police commissioner. I further recommend that legislation be enacted to require POCD review of any project with the weight equivalent to one vote on the approval or disapproval of a project. In other words, the POCD should have representation on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you going to submit the written comments? Can I have those?
I will if I can have to do it tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay.
That's fine. I just asked that those comments be submitted in writing so make sure that my notes are reasonably thorough. Other questions? Yes? Comments?
Hi, I'm Dan Fitzgerald. I'll speak up a little bit. Sure, yeah, I'm Dan Fitzgerald. I'm on the Environment Conservation Commission and the Community Forestry Commission. And there's a couple items I want to ask about. You know, every time you mention Brantford, you mention promoting, and I just understand, like, is that just more signs, or are there options for that? Because, you know, promoting Brantford, you know, in town and how people get around it, I mean, it seems like there's going to be the availability add more signs than already are. And there are big pieces of parking. In addition to that, you know, it's a tough act to follow, kind of asking about, you know, how we can enforce development, right? I mean, we all see what's going on Route 1, you know, both on the hill and, you know, next to Clancy's funeral home there. But, like, will the implementation of this PODC enable the people of Brantford to be able to say, hey, you know, this building isn't in the spirit of PODC, and how can we, if we do implement this, be able to add that voice?
So, I mean, there's a couple of elements. I think that one of the questions that was raised by the speaker before you is considering the POCD. If you go to the implementation chapter in the POCD, there's actually a proposed form, if you will, that would go with applications and applicants and suggest to them that you have to demonstrate as part of certain types of applications your consistency with the POCD. Now, people can get artful in their responses, but it's information for the commission to consider. The challenge that we have is that land use is a very delicate balance between people's property rights and the public interest. And in law, it's called the police power. We can regulate things for the public good. But there's rules that we have to abide by. So the issue is we have to define our rules up front, and then we have to implement them fairly. So the legal concepts of due process, equal protection, all need to be followed. And so in the middle of an application process, they've applied under the regs in place. And the commission is duty bound to review it with the regulations in place. The POCD, in this case, suggests some possible changes to regulations and other things. And the plan is advisory. It doesn't make the regulation changes happen, but that's where you, can all get involved in implementing the plan and urge and encourage that those regulation changes get made so that we have the best tools possible to review these things so that when future applications come in, we have the best tools in place.
Does the implementation provide a body to speak up, or is it just paper? I mean, as a member, like, this is my question.
Well, there are several members of Planning and Zoning who are on the committee. The POCD recommends at this point in time the reactivation of the Strategic Review Committee, and our hope is that that entity could be an ongoing entity to encourage and promote implementation. But a plan doesn't force the Board of Selectmen to do anything, the RTM to do anything, Conservation or the Tree Commission to do anything. It doesn't have that power. But by all of us believing that this will make Brantford a better place and promoting it, can help encourage good things to happen. So the power in a POCD is not that somebody told you so, but is that all of us agree that doing something like this will make Brantford a better place. So we need to get together to make that happen.
Glenn,
microphone come. Yep, there you go.
Greg Hayes. I spent a whole career whining about zoning as an architect because they.
Well, I'm glad you finally owned up to that now. So. Okay, everybody hold it. We're going to go through a 12-step process here. We're all going to...
Because they were complicating my life, making my clients do things they didn't want to do. But in retrospect, I look at what has resulted in Connecticut and New England from those zoning ordinances. This is a much better place to live than it would have been. Now, the problem, a major problem seems to be implementation and enforcement, actually putting teeth in the POCD.
Yep.
How do you do that? I mean, it's not, it has to be done within the structure that we have legally and regulatorily. Yep. Is this something that has to go through the courts? Is there something that ought to be done at a higher level, like at the state level,
I think
to make this planning more effective?
I think it's up to each community to find what works for it, to make it more effective. Brantford's different than Guilford, that's different than Madison, that's different from Killingworth, so you can go all around the state. Every community is different. Some communities pick up the plan, run with it, and are very active in implementation. Other communities say, well, that was nice, we finished it, we've adopted it, then they put it on a shelf. I feel that my job, as part of this process here, is to get you and people who are watching on TV excited about the plan and the potential for Brantford's future, and to pick up these pieces and run with them so that we can make Brantford a better place. But the written word will not make any of you do something. There will be times on either a pending application you'll think the POCD is the greatest thing you ever saw, and there's times it recommends something and you're opposed to it. But it gets its value by promoting this type of community discussion. I believe it's a worthwhile process, even as an advisory document, because it makes us all realize the potential and the possibilities we have. So I would want for all of you to pick up this ball and run with it in RTM, or get on the Strategic Review Committee, or Planning and Zoning, or show up at these meetings and recommend and promote these types of things, because that's the way that we can make it happen and make change happen. So.
Years before the previous plan, Shirley Rasmus decided that every single business should increase the look in front of their business by creating some garden-like or attractive natural image. How did she do that? Because that's what happened, and that's why our town looks the way it does compared to most of the towns in the area. I'm asking that question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Again, Harrison, the town planner. We do have those rules in the zoning regulations. So when developments come in, they're examining and requirements for landscaping go on the front. Sorry, how's that?
You have to hold it.
I do know, I just.
Turn it 90. Turn it.
Drifting this way, but
There
it
you go.
doesn't matter. It goes that way.
You're a lounge singer, Harry. There you go.
I am not
there you go. There you
I
go. Much better.
So let's say those requirements are in place and we apply them as staff and as the Planning and Zoning Commission, but we can only implement them when someone comes in to do something to their property that brings them within the review of the zoning regulations. So you can't legally go to a property that you think is not looking the way it might or looking the way it could if it came in on the zoning regulations for new development. We have to wait until they apply for something. That's how the process works. Yeah, you were next.
I think that answered some of my question, because some of the discussion has been around how we put teeth in this Ppo Cd. And as a consultant that works with other towns in, creating Ppo Cds and so forth, I guess I'm looking to you to say, how have other towns put teeth in, rather than telling us, okay, we're going to get excited, we're going to promote it, we're going to talk about it and so forth. How do other people put teeth in it? And maybe that is the answer, is to look at what within the Ppo Cd could be translated into planning and zoning regulations.
So I think that, yep, I think that's a great question. And I think that that's the way the implementation chapter is set up. The four key things that Brantford needs to do are in there. First of all is that the plan recommends we look at establishing or reinvigorating the Strategic Review Committee, because their job is to promote and cheerlead and guide other boards in their implementation of the plan. So planning and zoning has regulatory responsibilities. Their meetings, as perhaps some of you know, can go very late in the evening over multiple nights. So it's crazy for them to try to keep focus on this. So a separate committee focused on Ppo Cd implementation is one of the key elements, if you will, that help move a plan towards implementation. The second thing is we recommended the page, if you will, get attached to the applications, which outlines the main recommendations of the Ppo Cd. And so applicants, you need to go through the plan and state how they are consistent or promote our accomplishment of these objectives. And we hope that they will be honest and the commission can challenge them and say, I noticed you didn't say that anything about this, and I'm looking at your plan and I'm thinking so we need to have that kind of discussion. And that becomes effective not on all planning and zoning applications, because some of them are meant to be administrative. The commission does not have a lot of discretion, but on discretionary applications, special permits, PDDs, zone changes, the commission can and should require that they answer those honestly and effectively. There's recommendations in there for the commission when they receive applications to use the Ppo Cd as a benchmark. That's the third thing. And then the fourth thing is to try to integrate this into the budgeting and financing and spending decisions of the town. So if we're going to follow through on coastal issues, we can't do it if we don't spend any money on it. We're going to have to. So if the plan says that's our #1 priority, our hope would be over time that funding would start to move in that direction to support these types of things. So I think if Brantford can make progress on those four things, plan implementation will naturally follow. And once we get in the habit of implementation, it just becomes sort of a way of life and moves ahead. And that would be our goal. So I think we've tried to tailor the plan to hit on the success stories that'll make this work.
I have a comment and a question. One, the comment concerns the sentiment that's been expressed that this is advisory, it doesn't mean anything, there's no teeth to it, there should be more implementation requirements that make it mandatory. And one of my comments onto that is that I believe it's not, I don't think that's wholly accurate, and I'm trying to think, I'm thinking of the 2008 Plan of Conservation Development, when I was on the Plan on Planning and Zoning Commission at that time, and I'm pretty sure that one of the things we were concerned about at that time was stormwater management. It's an engineering issue, who cares, right? Well, one of the things for stormwater management is you want to retain as much water on site. You don't want to export it all off site. You want to, and building coverage is an issue about that, because if you put a lot of pavement in buildings, the water can't go into the soil, it's going to go off site. So it's got to be absorbed on site. So based on the discussion in the 2008 Plan of Conservation and Development, we actually decreased coverage requirements we amended the zoning regulations, I think it was at 75% for the industrial and the commercial zones, and we decreased it to 60%. So that's still a lot of coverage on the site, you could say, but that was a decrease, and it was sort of based on something that was in the 2008 Plan of Conservation Development, started there. We amended the zoning regulations, and how does that apply? Well, 250 North Main Street, one of the site limiting factors, and if you listen to the developer speak, got up there and he said, and we've complied with the coverage requirement. Coverage, had it been 75%, had it been something bigger, they would have had a lot more bigger stuff. Just because, you know, we started something in the planning, it was implemented by a change in the regulation, it served to limit an actual development that we decided last week. So that's just the comments that yes, it can make a difference, and it has made a difference, and it can continue to make a difference if we do it right. The question I had is more just hearing the outline, and this is for Glenn, because you do this across the state and the whole committee. Is demographics destiny? Because we started out by talking about how the average age has gone from 30 in 1970 to 46 now. And so what the trend seems to be in 10 years is going to be 50. We're going to keep getting older. And if you think about that, what does that mean for the development patterns? Does that mean we should, you know, discourage single-family dwellings because, you know, there's an older population, you're going to do that, or whatever? And, you know, what does that mean? Because part of me is saying, I don't like that. I mean, I want to reverse it. I want young families here. I want Brantford to be attractive. I want to, you know, and what gets them in there? So is there a way to reverse it? You know, can we have inexpensive starting housing? You know, can we have good schools? Because frankly, I think that's what gets people in. If they're looking around in towns and know people, well, I'm going, they got a great school system. That's important. Are the taxes high? Those are the things we got to look at too. And how does that all fit in there? Because I'm hearing, you know, the diversity here, you know, this is where we're going, and that ain't going to change. I expect it is going to happen, and it's going to change. On the other hand, I want to encourage it to open. I like the fact that we, you know, the girls, I have nothing, I've never played lacrosse in my life, but our girls lacrosse team just won the state champions. Great. Let's have the kids there. Continue to do it. So, you know, I'm proud of that. So I want to have that diversity. So anyway, I don't know how you balance that for planning. And
so demographics is not destiny.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that's happened since 1970 is that each of us, our life expectancy has gotten much older. So we're all living longer than we had any right to believe when we were born. The life expectancy at that time was a lot less. So what we're actually seeing in the demographics of Brantford is, in a sense, I believe, a reflection of the fact that people love this community. So people in town who have lived here for much of their lives don't want to leave, right? So if you don't want to leave and you stay here because it's such a great community, what happens is the age group gets older, right? And eventually it'll balance itself out. We have a very diverse housing stock. We have a range of housing opportunities available for people, but people love it here so much if the units don't become available, it's hard for us to refresh our population. And demographically, the world's changing too, so younger people. My kids have graduated from college. They've all gone off to hipper places than where I live. And so Brantford, because of our proximity to New Haven, academic institutions, Shoreline East, we are well positioned for a lot of different types of things to happen, and the economy has to grow and change as well. So it's not destiny. We're not headed on a path that can't be changed. It will balance itself out over time. But the number one thing that's happening is we're all 10 years older than we were 10 years ago, and 10 years from now we'll be 10 years older still. And we may all still live here. So the median age may get older, but eventually it'll balance itself out as well. Oh, I'm sorry, here and then, yeah.
Good evening, Michael Pascasillo. I also have a comment and a question. First the comment is working and living throughout Connecticut, and I'm well-traveled, and I've been to many communities. And what I have experienced here in Brantford is this is a lovely community. And it is a community with heart where people are invested in its destiny. And I see that not just in government, but people that I work with. And working in Brantford, I will tell you that if you look at the statistics, my field is public health, we enjoy some very good statistics when it comes to occupation, income, and education. And those three factors determine good health, happiness, and success. So I just have to commend this community for that. It was touched on a little bit, but I just want to be very direct in the question. And that is, with a plan like this, we're talking about our future. How do we engage our children? Because honestly, I'm pointing myself out too, our future is going to start with us, but really it's going to be the children. Because if we engage the youth, they're going to feel vested and are more likely to stay in the community and not move elsewhere. So I think part of the plan, maybe some thought needs to be put it in some working group to engage our kids so they're invested in the future of this community. Thank you.
I don't have a direct answer to your question. I mean, I think as part of our survey that we did as part of the plan, we specifically asked what it was that attracted people to Brantford. And one of the questions that we asked that we got interesting responses to was who grew up in Brantford, left to find their way in the world, and then came back. And again, that type of stuff was surprising. So I think doing what we're doing, planting the seeds for a successful community in the future, will hopefully bring people back and attract people. But sometimes people need to go outside Brantford to figure out that this is the place for them, et cetera.
I just wanted to follow up on these last two comments that I think that active transportation, like walking and biking, are part of attracting young people, and transit-oriented development. And we are so well positioned for all of that. I just want to add that I think we could attract tourist dollars for tax benefits as well, but we aren't really making enough of it. We are a wonderful, attractive community, and I think if we create the right opportunities, people will come here and spend money here.
I'm Ted Ellison, I'm the executive board of the Sidewalk Association. In the plan it says that you want to maintain and enhance Stony Creek Village as a secondary to the town center, focal point in Brantford. I'm speaking personally. I'm proud of Stony Creek, and I realize that the town knows most of the tourist attractions of Stony Creek. So I'm also I'd like to see people having a good time. A lot of my neighbors don't feel that way. I guess my question to you is, what can the town do to help us with the growth pains that we have, such as parking and all these different things which are straining us right now, and of course if you're going to enhance it, it's going to be even more.
So I think the section of the plan, I think it's the chapter on structure. I'm not quite sure what number that is. It has a little sidebar that talks about each of these village areas, and Stony Creek is in there. And I think it identifies the desire, if you will, to do more detailed planning for the Stony Creek area. Through my work with the steering committee on the plan, I've recognized the diversity of thoughts and opinions about Stony Creek. And I think the right answer is Stony Creek needs to figure out what it wants to be when it grows up. So I think the town supporting the concept of additional planning for these areas, each of the villages, to figure out what their potential might be and what works best for them, is something that we can or should be working on in the future. And it's not a desire to spend more money or anything else. It's the issue is sooner or later we got to stop talking about things and figure out what it is we can do. I think Stony Creek is a unique situation, and Stony Creek should figure out its situation. So I think it's called out in the plan precisely for that reason.
That's true, but as I mentioned, part of the problem we have is the fact that we don't own the parks, we don't own the beach, we don't own the boat ramp, we don't own the dock. Those are the things which really are bringing people into the town. So we really need some help from the town in terms of.
But you also have the improved civic to Stony Creek.
Village district?
Not the village district, no, the
association.
Thank you, yes, the association. So the property owners also have the ability, and the plan also talks about the fact that there are certain things in the plan, for example, in coastal areas, the town may take responsibility for, property owners are going to have to take responsibility for, and the civic associations in the interim or in the middle can deal with these issues as well. So I think figuring out how that works is something that needs to be considered.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Glenn, if I can make a quick observation.
Sure.
You said Stony Creek has to think about what it wants to be when it grows up. I think the problem there is that Stony Creek doesn't want to grow up.
Well, my wife will tell you that I don't want to grow up either, and so, but I do think though, but these issues, you know, Mark Twain had a famous quote. I love this quote. He says, everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it, right? So think about that for a moment. It's kind of, it's chuckle-worthy in that type of situation. So I think the issue we have sometimes in our community is we always talk about things and say somebody should do something about blank. And the issue is, well, then let's figure out what that is and let's get it done. So I'm a planner. So I think for Stony Creek, there's certain things that they want, and then there's certain things that they don't want. So that, in a sense, starts to become the basis or a foundation for a plan, just a very simple document, some basic principles that could start to organize this information, get consensus, and then we can move ahead and figure out who's going to start to take care of these things. So if the issues we don't want to grow up, then there's your plan right there. Yeah. Sorry.
Perry Marsgood, I'm Chairman of Economic Development. And I became chairman about 4 years ago, and one of the things that I said that I felt we needed to concentrate on were the 4 exits that we have that within a tenth of a mile to a quarter of a mile dump onto Route 1, and the Meadow Street, which is between the Old Atlantic Wire and MIF. Now those two, through private developers, have really taken a good stronghold, and we still have the exits to be concerned with. Now, exit 53 came up at a recent meeting, and the BL had come up with 3 alternatives, one of which they settled by merging a couple of different ideas from the different things, changing the road construction from exit 53, et cetera, et cetera. That seems very good. However, we're $20 to $30 million in 10 to 20 years away from that happening. It can happen in phases, of which one phase along Route 1 can happen within the next few years. It's a state road, it's not the highway. And that could be very beneficial to the town. And the way that they thought it would work well is a way that I feel and those that were at the meeting felt was very good. 54 has really handled the traffic well. But if we do too much at exit 53 before we have additional northbound entrance and southbound exits, it's going to put a damper and a big problem at the North Main Street by the firehouse, etc. You get onto exit 55, it dumps right onto Route 1, and that pretty much is fine with the exception of some of the businesses coming and going, and we should make sure that we can nurture that. Exit 56 is the main problem. And what I happen to notice in the latest report is it's still listing as more industry as opposed to mixed use. And I believe, and the Economic Development Commission also concurs, that is much better used as a mixed use because it dumps right out to Route 1. The current project that is on the table with Costco was one of the ones that they came out with a nice plan that really filtered the traffic wisely. If that doesn't come through, are we back to industry again, or can we still keep it? And that's where I think that you definitely need to keep that area as more of a mixed use that would invite some retail, some industry, some office, restaurants, etc. Because all the businesses that I've talked to in that area are very much in favor of more of a mixed use as opposed to strictly an industry. Industry can survive just as well a mile or 2 miles away from that exit, whereas you won't see other development survive as well if you don't do that. So I just think that you look at your own surveys that are in your report, and well over 50% of the people that responded were very much in favor of Costco specifically, not even if it were just a case of mixed use. I think if you do mixed use, you have even more people in favor of that. So I just think that look back at that where you have it as industry, and it really should be between the 95 and Route 1 area. That should be kind of like redistricted as more of a mixed use. Thank you.
Thank you. I put a page number up here thinking that somebody was going to have something for us. No?
I just have a quick question. I think Janet really hit the nail on the head describing how some developers in the market pursue blowing up, a ridge and destroying Brantford character slowly via the methodology she described. It's not, people have commented on what she said, but it's still unclear to me what specifically can be done to correct that problem.
Well, so the problem we have is that each of us, if we own property, has property rights. So I have a situation where I live where somebody, lots around me are wooded, very pretty, attractive, rural feeling or whatever. Somebody bought the house down the street, and I think the backstory is they came from a major New York metropolitan area, but they were afraid of ticks. They clear-cut their lot. And what that did to the neighbors and drainage was kind of remarkable. But the neighbors aren't happy. It wasn't a neighborly thing to have done, but it was their property, there were their trees. Could they take those trees down? And the recognition amongst the neighborhood was yes, they could. We wish they hadn't, but yes, they could. So the challenge we have in zoning and other things like this is what property rights come with that. We establish regulations for people that say maximum coverage, how many parking spaces they need to provide. But the issues about whether or not you can grade or blast or other things like that are not as managed or limited. And so sometimes people do those things to address our other regulations. So now that we're more experienced with this, we can take a look at that particular situation, but sometimes that's what people do. Had the site been flat, they might have just cleared all the trees and regraded it anyway. It would have been the same sort of result. And it's, in a sense, part of the property rights that people have. And so we try to find the right balance between what we as a community want and expect, and we try to encourage this in the Ppo Cd, but then there's certain rights, if you will, that we're not prepared to go into people's houses and say, no, you can't do this, or you can't do that. We try to find a balance which is fair to all of us. Some of the work I do is on zoning regulations, and as part of the public meeting I say to people, how many people in the room feel the government should have a right to tell you what you can do on your property? And everybody's like, no. And then how many people feel the government should have a right to tell your neighbor what they can do on their property? And everybody's house goes up.
That's not true in all states.
No, it's not. But
there are states where you can't do what you just
I understand, but
why
under...
can't we be like that?
I mean,
we can talk to New York about trying to, finagle that line over. But
it's really down to, it has nothing to do with our group, though. Our recommendations are things that people can take to the RTM. They can take them to the, we hopefully will have a good implementation committee, I can't say that word, that will bring some of this stuff to planning and zoning and say, okay, here's a specific thing I think that is a good idea. And it's in the plan and it's supported by the community, and let's move forward with that. Let's go to the RTM and say, we don't want this anymore, or we want this, or we want you to work on X and we want to, put our support behind that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here. I mean, and there's stuff for everyone to love and everyone to hate. And it's just a matter of whether or not that ignites the interest of the community to take it to the next step, which is to have your town legislators, or even in some cases, state legislation, that will help support some of these ideas that we think will make Brantford a better place. So it's, I've been on the Brantford Center Review Board for years, and we don't have any teeth be there. But we meet with individual property owners who want to work on their properties in the center of town, and we make suggestions to them. We think it would be nicer if we did it this way. And we have a lot of influence on how things turn out in the center of town, even though we can't make them do anything. But I think what we've done here is, and I was the same when I started on this committee, I said, you know, what are they going to do with this thing? You know? But the bottom line is that we have the opportunity to do something with it if we want to. And there's been a lot of hours and a lot of time, and Glenn's done a lot of work on this thing that it's there. You know, so if we don't do something with it, it's our own fault. And we can't, you know, bitch at anybody else in town if we don't do something about it. So.
Well, I think that's very well said. You think something will happen? I mean, who's going to be on top of somebody to say, okay, you got to do this? I mean, everybody's so busy.
I know, well, we all are, and that's the problem with everything we do these days. We want someone else to do it for us. And, I mean, you guys all come to these meetings. You know what's going on in town, but how many are here? You know, 40 people. I mean, that's not a lot. I mean, and there's, you know, there should be a whole lot more people here, you know. And we would love it if there were, because the more people are here, the more people would feel some enthusiasm toward some of the ideas that are in this document. And, you know, we would love to have any and all of you involved going forward to help the implementation of this, because we can't do it. I mean, that's not our purview, is to make it happen, but we do have the ability as, you know, as a document to give suggestions on how we can get there. And getting there is an implementation committee, it's planning and zoning, and like Glenn says, they're so busy looking at applications every month, they don't have time for an extra meeting every month to say, okay, how can we improve planning and zoning? That's what an implementation committee could work on. So, Shirley, you should be on that. A whole bunch of other people here.
Nobody leaves here alive tonight. I think what Phil said is really important, and I think one of the things I just want to make sure I got on paper here for people to take a look at is that if you have thoughts or comments here tonight, we have an email box set up. If you're driving home and say, gosh, I wish I'd said that, you wake up tomorrow. Yeah. Terry Elton. If you have thoughts after the meeting, today, tomorrow, or when you get a chance to see the program on TV, we have a mailbox set up, Ppo Cd at Brantford-ct.gov. If you would send your thought, Ppo Cd at Brantford-ct.gov. Perfect. Talk slower, thank you. But over the next week or so, let's say by June 30th, by the end of the month, if you think of something you would like to email to us, please do so. So I think that gives you and others who are watching on TV time, if you will, to get thoughts to us. Yes?
I know you're trying to terminate here.
No, I'm not. We got plenty of time.
I just would, my name is Joan Grossman, and I spoke at the last Ppo Cd meeting about my own particular interest in transportation, especially in view of the fact that this is, that we're heading toward a majority, demographic majority at age 60 folks in Brantford by 2030. I think that was the figure. I'm a representative of that demographic. And I'm very, very interested. I spoke a little bit about my own interest in volunteering to take part in the analysis of existing public transportation options in shoreline towns, as well as Connecticut communities that now offer minibus transportation within their own borders. Old Saybrook, Westport are two of these. And I was hoping that this could continue as a project to find out more of what was going on. But in listening tonight, particularly struck me that Brantford has an unusually large number of citizens who serve on boards and commissions. And perhaps the administrator of the town might turn to these commissions and ask them to look at the Ppo Cd recommendations that apply to the issues that each board deals with. We would have a core of folks who looked at each of these issues. And of course, they could have hearings and talk with people in the town who had those particular concerns. So this might be a structure that could be used to actually have a core of people who would be working on this. And with emerging issues, new groups and individuals could come to the forefront. It wouldn't have to be just the ones on the boards and commissions, but we would have a certain core of folks. I think that might be a way of beginning to look at implementing the recommendations that came both in the 2008 and in the recent Ppo Cd. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in the chapters of the plan, there are recommendations and there are tables that identify the board or entity in town that's considered to be the leader, and then other boards that are involved. We call those partners. And so the whole idea is that if something doesn't get done, we're going to be able to look at this commission and say, you were supposed to be working on this. And also the Strategic Review Committee can nudge and remind people what their responsibilities are. So hopefully we've already started on that pathway. So thank you for that.
I'm David Cobley. I have 4 more elemental concerns. 1, city water, universal. City sewers, universal. An airport that functions, tweed. And finally, no left turns across all 4 lanes of Route 1. Thank you.
Got him. Thank you.
Your recommendation about having our administrator, he had to leave, speak to various boards and commissions. Tonight is the meeting for this month on one of the boards on which I serve. And I was instructed by the chairman and by the director of recreation, I need to go to this meeting. It is very, very important. And they asked me to, at our next meeting, report back what I think is the most important aspect that our board can address and work on. So, great idea.
I just have a quick question. We've talked about the Strategic Review Board. I wonder if anybody here knows, was it formed in 2008? Did it continue to meet regularly? Has it had any impact? Is there any possibility in the future that the Strategic Review Board could actually have the kind of position that some of the, like the fire marshal, the police chief, the town engineer, so on, have in dealing with planning and zoning decisions? Is there some way that there could be a connection between the Strategic Review Board and the PCC, so that there's an active interchange between them?
The Strategic Review Committee was set up following the 2008 Ppo Cd because it was recommended, and I think the 2008 Ppo Cd used the phraseology Plan Implementation Committee. When Brantford adopted, I think it was an ordinance, correct? Established by ordinance.
But did it meet?
It did. It did. And in fact, as I mentioned earlier, the booklets that have the sidebars that report on the progress that was made, Much of that progress was a result of the recommendations and encouragement of the Strategic Review Committee, keeping the other boards and commissions. Don't forget, most of the recommendations in the POCD often fall to planning and zoning. So the regulation changes that Mr. Anderson and others have talked about fell in their lap, and they took them up and adopted and implemented many of those. So that's the way and the place, if you will, that much of this can and should happen, because we're dealing with the physical development of our community, and that really kind of falls within planning and zoning's bailiwick very often. So I think, was it effective? I think it was, but over time, a plan has, you know, sort of a half-life that over time it's 10 years old, and they haven't met in a while, but I think the idea of reinvigorating that committee is a recommendation in the plan, and hopefully it's the first one that'll get implemented.
How exactly would that, what would the step process be for that, leaving here today to reestablish that committee?
Who, I'm sorry, what was the last?
What would be the step-by-step process
to establish?
To reestablish that committee?
Well, it's established, it's in the, I think, the appointing authority.
It's in the code.
It's in the code. Just trying to think if I have it with me. I don't think that I do. So Board of Selectmen would appoint members to the committee. We've had discussions within our plan update committee whether the membership might be interested in continuing on as members of the Strategic Review Committee, sort of transition into that role, because they have worked very hard on these recommendations and strategies. They probably know them better than anybody, that they could be an effective reinvigoration of that committee. But right now, the process from where we are today going forward, we've taken down all of your comments on TV and minutes and my notes, et cetera. We're going to be getting together next month to go through and review these comments, talk about changes in the plan to reflect these comments. In the not too distant future, we will forward the plan to Planning and Zoning with a recommendation for adoption. And at that point in time, the committee's work will have, they'll be on call perhaps if Planning and Zoning needs them, but the responsibility will go to Planning and Zoning. I think following that, the next step would then, once the plan is adopted, Planning and Zoning adopts the plan, the plan implementation and the Strategic Review Committee would be the logical next step after that to kind of get that going. So it could be up and running in 6 months. It could be sooner, depending on the process of plan adoption.
So just to recap, it goes to Planning and Zoning first.
The plan goes to the
plan that is finalized with this group, correct? Then goes to Planning and Zoning, and then from Planning and Zoning, we can step forward and establish individuals for this committee.
That would be logical to establish the committee. I mean, I guess you could establish the committee in advance of plan adoption. Okay. Maybe the two of them come together at the same time. But that's a good point. You know, should they be? It's a chicken and egg thing, right? So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Because I think we had sort of thought that far down the road, but actually maybe it makes sense to get the Strategic Review Committee reinvigorated so that as the plan is done, they're right there.
And we have the interest and
yep.
Glenn, you just said how the committee would consider suggestions that have been made tonight, maybe incorporate them. Frankly, I think some of the suggestions made tonight have been contradictory. I mean, there's been a lot of sentiment for limiting strip development. Well, there's a lot in the plan now for limiting strip development, not letting West Main Street morph into the rest of town. And yet, with all due respect, you've had a suggestion over here from Mr. Maresca that could be contrary to that. So I'm just curious how the committee is going to deal with an issue like this.
I can't answer for them, but I think the purpose of tonight's meeting is to get the thoughts down on paper. I'm going to reorganize these notes sort of by topic so that we'll get together and the committee members will review and reflect and say, I think we should make this change, or I feel comfortable with the strategies we've got, et cetera. So if your thoughts or ideas don't get embraced or included in the plan, it's not necessarily a bad idea. It's just given the committee, they felt that there were certain things or directions that were important strategies for the town to pursue. So I don't know what the results will be, but we'll find out as the plan moves forward. There will be a public hearing on adoption by Planning and Zoning. So there will be before adoption of the plan. There will be a public hearing, if you will, to get additional public comment before adoption.
I have an editorial comment, not really a question. It seems to me that these local plans for development are fine, but how do we interface with other towns? The problem in Connecticut is we have 169 different entities. There's very little interface between them. There's a great deal of wasted energy, not to say anything of wasted funds, in a state which is bankrupt or near bankruptcy. So I know this isn't something that your committee was charged to take up, but certainly in addition to having a plan for each town and city, there ought to be some consideration given to the interface with others. Because in states which have managed in some ways, perhaps more successfully in terms of population growth, the growth of business and industry, there's certainly more in the way of this kind of cooperation. Our counties are basically meaningless. So whether we talk about education or we talk about any other issue, what we have is duplication and waste. Why should the towns of Brantford and Guilford not buy their supplies together? What is it that makes it necessary for every town or regional school district to essentially decide the text or approve the texts that are recommended? So my suggestion is that the committee, when you submit your report, make a strong suggestion that there has to be an interface of regional cooperation. Otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels. We're wasting money. You mentioned the business of climate change. We could do the best job in the world in Brantford with regard to our town, but it's not going to make much difference in terms of the greater shoreline.
Yep, absolutely.
Can you talk about the COG?
I was just about to mention that.
Okay.
So the question here is that Connecticut, again, we are kind of a home rule state. We believe we've been here since colonial times, you know, et cetera. So each community does work by itself. But when Connecticut got rid of the counties, they also established regional councils of government or regional planning agencies. And the South Central Regional Council of Governments, which includes Brantford, has done quite a bit of work in some of these areas, and they are promoting more intermunicipal cooperation. I believe there is language in the plan that promotes regionalism, and we did look at what our surrounding towns are doing. I'll go back and take a look at that to make sure. And I think as the state's fiscal challenges continue to filter down to municipalities, there'll be greater incentives for communities to work together. So sometimes it takes a little bit of a crisis to get everybody kind of more on the same page. So we can, I guess I'm not wishing for a crisis, but that may be an outgrowth of that. There you go.
Bill Horn, I just want to sort of loop back and address Ron's first comment about what purpose the plan serves. I know from my experience, if I'm applying for a state open space grant, I have to show how it's consistent with the town plan of conservation and development and the regional plan of conservation and development and the state plan of conservation and development. So it's a reference document that state agencies that are making grants will refer to.
Brantford's representative to the regional planning commission. Here's the regional planning commission plan. It's on the same cycle we are, so they're doing it for 2018 as well. And they're, I think, probably going to adopt it in the next month or so.
What is the region? How do you define it?
This is a draft of a new one. It was I think Milo and McGroom was a consultant, and it's sort of general. It's kind of like ours, and you're dealing with urban stuff, urban suburbs, strong city, strong whatever mutuality. I can remember there was more urban-suburban wars than there are now. Now there's a lot more, I think, cooperation. There's sort of a sense that if we got a, you know, New Haven thrives, we thrive, whereas, you know, let's fight for a mall in New Haven versus the suburbs or something, that those wars are not. So hey, it's easier than easy.
Is it the county? What is
It's
it?
15 towns in the New Haven area.
So our region goes from Madison to Milford and up to Meriden. No. So the regional planning agencies, we used to have 8 counties in Connecticut. They were slowly diminished and disappeared, really. I think sheriffs were the last vestige, if you will, of the county government. So since the 60s, we've had what were originally regional planning agencies, and then probably 10 years ago, the requirement was they all become essentially COGs, or councils of government, representing the chief elected officials. And there were 15 at one point in time, and they've distilled those down to, I think it's 9 now. But they were based on sort of economic affinities and locations. The counties were from colonial times based on courthouses, and nowadays the COGs are kind of more configured on an economic type region and approach, et cetera. So hopefully it's a step towards more meaningful regionalism, because you're supposed to have some more things in common with your neighbors. As Chuck pointed out, the idea that if New Haven thrives, we thrive. So economically, again, we're sort of all connected. So again, that's the hope and intention. Yes?
Mrs. Grossman, on some of your comments, first of all, as you and your husband have 2 successful car dealerships in Old Saybrook, and the fact that you recognize the in-town transportation shuttle is very good. We've been trying to do that in Brantford on the economic development. The last 3 or 4 years we've had it, and it gets pushed down, but it's still something that we're actively want to do. I think as the community center finishes up and other things are going on in town, it'll be more of a need as opposed to a want that will come up. So I thank you for that. And I haven't noticed that Clinton also has one too. I happened to be out that way the other day, and I noticed that they have one. So it is something that does make sense to get people from restaurant to restaurant, train station, et cetera, et cetera. So that's good. In regard to the transit or in-district, that really I feel has been good. There were some studies before. In regard to talking about the different commissions and whatever, the steering committee itself has representatives from a lot of the different commissions in town. So there are different aspects and everything else that has worked. In regard to the morphing of West Main, the difference between West Main and East Main is the current plan that's at exit 56 takes a large parcel, multiple large parcels, and only has 1 or 2 or 3 feeds from one street, from another, as opposed to with West Main, that's a perfect example of not planning in advance.
Okay, Perry, comments are on the plan, so okay. Direct them to me.
Okay, so in regard to that, that's where we didn't have a plan 40 years ago. And a business opened up, or something came up, and somebody had a property and they did something with it. So as we look at this plan, and as we try to do the right thing for the town, we look at certain areas where we say this can be developed, but let's develop it responsibly. And that's where, as a feed off of 95 onto Route 1 or thereabouts, if we do it responsibly with limited cutouts, you'll really be able to control the traffic and not have too many problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the clock's a little fast. We good here? I yield 9 minutes to my colleagues from.
That's what can send in emails.
Please do.
To June 30th.
Let's say June 30th, and the reason is that I think the meeting with the committee is, I think, July 11th, something like that. So if you get your comments in by the end of June, that gives me time to organize them and get a report back together, if you will, for the committee in time, so they get a chance to review it about a week in advance of the meeting. So if we say June 30th is our deadline date, and Ppo Cd at Brantford-ct.gov works perfect.
Would that be sent out to the same notice that came out because
The
that notice said we had to have it in before this meeting.
No, I think I made the decision here tonight to open this window up for you and for others so that other thoughts. Oh, I'll talk to Harry about that.
Town Facebook as well?
Yeah, I think, sure. Did you get that, Harry? So put a notice on the town Facebook.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
we'll do that.
Yeah.
We'll get something out with, I think, reps of the media here tonight.
But send a regular email to those of us who don't use Facebook.
If we have your email, we have to send something to you.
But well, I received an email from you all about
Well,
this
the
meeting.
email's going around town, so I sent an email out to a lot of boards and commissioners and asked people to distribute it, so I don't know how far it went out.
Yep. But hey, I mean, I think, yeah. All of the information on the POCD is on the town website. We'll put a notice there that the comment period is open. We look forward to whatever comments you and others might have, and we'll give them full consideration at the meeting in July. So with that, I think I have one more slide. Looks familiar, right? Thank you, everybody, for coming. We really appreciate your comments. Thanks for making the plan better. Appreciate it.
The preceding program was brought to you through the support of the Town of Brantford. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at BrantfordTV.org.